Today we'll be learning how to solve equations. More specifically, we'll learn how to solve one-step equations, two-step equations, and multi-step equations. In our first example, we are going to solve for the variable y in the equation y minus 3 equals 2. The first thing you want to do is identify your variable, and our variable is y. By the end of all our steps, we will have wanted to have isolated the variable y. However, our variable y is not isolated. It is stuck with this negative 3. We're going to try and get rid of this negative 3. To get rid of this negative 3, we're going to have to do the opposite operation. Negative pretty much is the same thing as subtraction, so this could be considered subtract 3. What is the opposite of subtract 3? It is plus 3. But what you do to one side, you have to do to the other side of the equation. Okay, so I'm going to add 3 to both sides of the equation. Y minus 3 plus 3 equals 2 plus 3. At this point, we want to simplify this equation. We are going to take a look at negative 3 plus 3. You should know that negative 3 plus 3 is equal to 0. And we don't like to write zeros into our equation, so that is just going to become y. The other side should be very simple. 2 plus 3 is equal to 5. What we've just done is we've isolated our variable of y. It is all by itself. Therefore, our final answer is y is equal to 5. In our next example, we are going to solve for the variable in the following equation, 3x equals 6. The very first thing you want to do is you want to identify the variable, and the variable here is x. Our goal is to isolate this variable of x. However, our variable of x is not isolated. It is not by itself. It is stuck with this 3. If you remember, there's an operation of multiplication in between this 3 and this x. You have to ask yourself, what is the opposite of multiply by 3? The opposite of multiply by 3 is divide by 3. Therefore, we are going to have to divide both sides of the equation by 3. There are different ways that you can write the next step. I'm going to show you how to divide by 3 using a fraction. So I'm going to rewrite 3x equals to 6. However, I'm going to divide both sides by 3 using a fraction. What you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. Therefore, I have 3x divided by 3 equals 6 divided by 3. I'm going to walk you through all these steps, even though some of you may be able to do this in your head. First off, let's look at 3 divided by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. The x stays the same. 6 divided by 3 is pretty simple. That is 2. However, anything multiplied by positive 1 stays exactly the same. Therefore, this 1x should just read as x, and that 2 stays exactly the same. Therefore, our final answer is x is equal to 2. In our next example, we want to solve for the variable in the equation 2x plus 4 equals 8. The first thing you want to do is identify the variable. The variable we have here is x. Ultimately, we want to isolate x. However, x is not alone. It is stuck with this 2 through multiplication and is stuck with this 4 through addition. So we're going to try and get rid of this 2 and this 4 in the next couple steps. You have to ask yourself, what is the opposite of multiply by 2? The opposite of multiply by 2 is divide by 2. Again, you have to ask yourself the question, what is the opposite of plus 4? The opposite of plus 4 is subtract 4. And what you do to one side, you're going to have to do to the other side. So I'll be showing you how to do this shortly. Before we proceed, I want you to recall the order of operations. You can remember the order of operations through the phrase BEDMAS, brackets, exponents, division, multiplication, addition, subtraction. When you're trying to solve for a variable with multiple steps, you actually can follow the reverse of BEDMAS. So I'm going to draw an arrow showing you that you'll be going from the S all the way to the B. So you're doing the opposite of BEDMAS. If I'm going to follow the opposite of BEDMAS, I'm going to have to look for subtraction and addition first. Therefore, I'm actually going to subtract 4 from both sides before I divide both sides by 2. So let's go ahead and subtract 4 from both sides. So this 2x stays exactly the same, and I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. Remember, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. Let's first take a look at positive 4 subtract 4. That should be pretty easy. Positive 4 subtract 4 is 0, and we're not going to write that 0 in, and our 2x stays exactly the same. So basically, we've canceled out that positive 4. Now, I'm going to take a look at the other side of the equation. 8 subtract 4, that is also pretty simple. 8 subtract 4 is 4. According to the reverse of BEDMAS, the next operations I should concern myself with is multiplication and division. And don't forget, we determined that we have to divide both sides by 2. So we are going to do that next. I'm going to divide both sides by 2 using fractions. So I'm going to put that over 2, and I'm going to put that over 2. 2 divided by 2 is equal to 1. The x stays the same. Next, we're going to take 4 and we're going to divide it by 2. That should be pretty simple. 4 divided by 2 is 2. However, we're not quite finished. We have this 1 in front of our variable, which we want isolated. We want it all by itself. As we've seen in previous questions, anything multiplied by positive 1 remains exactly the same. So that x should remain the same, and that x is going to be equal to 2. So x equals 2 is our final answer. I'm going to zoom out to show you all the work that went into this one question. In this example, we're going to solve for the variable in the equation 2 minus 3x equals 8. The first thing you want to do is identify the variable. The variable we have here is x. Ultimately, we want to isolate our variable of x. We want it all by itself. However, x is currently stuck with negative 3 through multiplication and is also stuck with this positive 2. To get rid of these numbers, we have to do the opposite operation. Over here, we have negative 3 multiplied by x. The opposite of multiply by negative 3 is divide by negative 3. And you'll notice I'm putting the negative 3 in brackets because I don't want the negative sign and division sign right beside each other because it can look a little bit confusing. The opposite of positive 2 is negative 2. In other words, subtract by 2. Again, there is no positive sign written in front of the 2. However, it is actually there. Once we've identified our opposite operations, we have to determine which one we're going to do first. And we can determine that through the opposite of BEDMAS. Therefore, we're going to look at if we have subtraction and addition before we do any multiplication and division. Over here, we have subtract by 2 and divide by negative 3. Therefore, we're going to subtract by 2 first before we divide by negative 3. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to write 2 subtract 2. This negative 3x stays exactly the same. I haven't touched it yet. But remember, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. If I subtracted 2 from the left side, I have to do that to the right side as well. Let's simplify this. 2 subtract 2 is 0. I am not going to write in the 0. This negative 3x stays exactly the same because I haven't touched it yet. Let's simplify 8 subtract 2. 8 subtract 2 is 6. At this point, we are going to divide both sides by negative 3. I'm going to do that with fractions. So I'm going to write negative 3x over negative 3. Remember, what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I'm going to write 6 over negative 3 on the right side. Let's zoom out and make a little bit of space for ourselves. On the left side, we have negative 3 divided by negative 3. If this is a little bit confusing for you, we can do this step by step. First of all, 3 divided by 3 is 1. When you have a negative number divided by a negative number, your answer is going to be positive. Therefore, this should be positive 1. This x stays the same. Over on the right side, we have 6 divided by negative 3. Let's just look at the numbers. 6 divided by 3 is 2. When you have a positive number divided by a negative number, your answer is going to be negative. Before we finish, let's get rid of this coefficient of positive 1. Remember, anything multiplied by positive 1 stays exactly the same. So instead of writing 1x, you should just write x is equal to negative 2. I'm going to zoom out a little bit to show you all my work, and I'm going to put a box around our final answer. X is equal to negative 2.